Welcome to episode 198 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. It is May 17, 1989. Medellín, Atlético Nacional against Danubio. Copa Libertadores semi-final, second leg. The first match in Montevideo finished 0-0. Now Nacional wins 6-0. Albeiro El Palomo Usuriaga scores 4. Alexis Garcia and Niver Arboleda add the others. On the pitch, it's a demolition. Off the pitch, it's one of the darkest stories in Libertadores history. Because years later, Argentine referee Carlos Espósito would say that the night before the match, he and his assistants, Juan Bava and Abel Nieco, were threatened by armed men linked to Pablo Escobar, including Jon Jairo Velázquez, or Popeye. So this is not just the night Atlético Nacional reached the Libertadores final. It is a story about beauty under pressure, football under threat, and a tournament being stress-tested by narco power at its most terrifying. But how did we get here? We start with Colombia. Colombian football had lived previous golden moments. We talked about El Dorado in episode 184, the 1949-54 gold rush, when Millonarios, Di Stefano, Pedernera, and others made Colombia briefly the wildest market in world football. But by the 1980s, the money was different. Cocaine demand, especially in the United States, produced extraordinary cartel wealth. Medellín and Cali became names far beyond Colombia. The drug trade entered politics, police, business, nightlife, and football. It's important to say this carefully. Atlético Nacional were not just a narco team. That would flatten the story and insult the football. Nacional had a serious sporting tradition. Founded in 1947, they had won Colombian titles before. In the 1970s, they rose under Osvaldo Zubeldía. Yes, the same Zubeldía from yesterday's Estudiantes episode. He brought discipline, preparation, and tactical edge to Medellín, winning Colombian league titles in 1976 and 81. After Zubeldía's death in 1982, Nacional remained important, but América de Cali dominated the decade. América, widely linked to the Cali cartel, reached 3 straight Copa Libertadores finals from 1985 to 87, but lost all 3. Then came Francisco Pacho Maturana. Maturana was not a gangster's invention. He's one of the great thinkers in Colombian football. He had played under Zubeldía, absorbed the idea that preparation mattered, and added a Colombian language of possession, rhythm, and confidence. His Nacional were known as puros criollos, built around Colombian players, and increasingly around the same football culture he was developing with the national team. René Higuita, Andrés Escobar, Leonel Álvarez, Luis Carlos Perea, Alexis Garcia, Jon Jairo Velázquez, Albeiro Usuriaga. This was not ugly football. It was expressive, technical, brave. Higuita was a sweeper keeper before the term became fashionable. Andrés Escobar was elegance and calm. Valderrama, with Colombia, became the creative center of Maturana's wider project. But the football existed inside a violent ecosystem. Pablo Escobar was a football obsessive, a bettor, a patron, and a symbol of Medellín's cartel power, whether influence was direct, indirect, proven, alleged, or simply ambient. Colombian football in those years could not escape the reality. Clubs, referees, players, and administrators were operating in a world where cartel money and cartel fear were close to the game. In 1988, Atlético Nacional finished runners-up in Colombia behind Millonarios, which put them into the 1989 Copa Libertadores. The first group was Colombian-Ecuadorian, Millonarios, Deportivo Quito, Emelec, and Nacional. The format had changed, and the top 3 teams advanced. Nacional were not spectacular at first. 3 draws, a defeat to Millonarios, then 2 wins. They finished second. And then the cup became real. In the round of 16, Racing Club of Argentina, Nacional won 2-0 in Medellín, lost 2-1 in Avellaneda, and advanced 3-2 on aggregate. In the quarterfinal, Millonarios. Nacional won 1-0 at home and drew 1-1 in Bogotá, and advanced. In the semifinal, Danubio of Uruguay, and the first leg at the Centenario finished 0-0. Then the Argentine officials traveled to Medellín for the return leg, and this is where the story enters the dark. Carlos Espósito would later say that from the moment they arrived, they were made to understand what could happen to referees who did not cooperate. He and his assistants, Juan Bava and Abel Nieco, were taken to the hotel. He said armed men later entered his room, with Popeye among them. There was a briefcase of money. There were weapons. There were threats. Nacional had to win. Their lives, they were told, had little value. And the next day, the referees went to the Antasio Girardot, and Atlético Nacional produced one of the most overwhelming performances in Colombian club history. Alexis Garcia scored early. Then Usuriaga took over. 4 goals. 4 from El Palomo. Niver Arboleda made it 6. Atlético Nacional 6. Danubio 0. On the football field, it was magnificent. Around the football field, it was horrifying. And that is the tension of this episode. The players didn't need guns to be brilliant. The team had talent, structure, and courage. But the environment was poisoned by people who believed football could be bent by fear. So what did it mean? Well, Atlético Nacional did become the first Colombian club to win the Copa Libertadores. In the final, they faced Olimpia of Paraguay. Olimpia won the first leg 2-0 in Asunción. Because the stadium was considered too small for the final, Nacional's home leg was moved to El Campín in Bogotá. Nacional won 2-0. Usuriaga scored. The tie went to penalties. 18 penalties. Higuita saved, and Higuita scored. Ever Almeida saved for Olimpia too. Players missed, players froze. The shootout stretched into something almost unbearable. And finally, Leonel Alvarez scored, and Nacional had it, the first Colombian Libertadores. A breakthrough for a country that had produced talent for decades, but had never conquered South America's club summit. But the darkness didn't end with the trophy. It intensified. Later in 1989, the Colombian league was cancelled after referee Alvaro Ortega was murdered in Medellín. His killing became the moment when football's crisis could no longer be dressed up as rumor, bravado, or betting gossip. If referees could be threatened in continental competition and killed in domestic football, the game itself was under attack. CONMEBOL responded with restrictions. Colombian clubs were kept out of parts of the 1990 Libertadores process, while Atlético Nacional, as defending champion, were allowed back in, not as a sign that everything was normal, but with their home matches moved away from Colombia. They played in Chile. And even there the shadow followed. In 1990, Nacional's match against Vasco da Gama became another scandal. The first version of the Medellín match was annulled after allegations the referee Daniel Cardelino had been threatened and offered money. The replay was staged in Santiago. This was the Libertadores trying to police a problem that was much larger than football. Nacional also found out how hard it is to turn continental glory into global coronation. They lost the Intercontinental Cup to Arrigo Sacchi's Milan in Tokyo 1-0 after extra time through Albeiro Usuriaga's late free kick. They lost the Recopa to Boca Juniors. They did, however, win the Copa Interamericana against Pumas. So the era was not simply collapse, but a mixture of triumph, sanction, and shadow. And what matters so deeply is that the football itself endured. Because the easy version of this story is Narcos with a ball. But Colombian football was also producing something beautiful. Maturana's Nacional fed Colombia's national team. In 1990, Colombia went back to the World Cup after 28 years and drew with West Germany. In 1993, they beat Argentina 5-0 in Buenos Aires, one of the great qualifying results in football history. Then came 94, the unbearable expectation, the early exit, and the murder of Andres Escobar, a story we will soon have to tell. Colombian football survived that too. Not quickly, not cleanly, and not without scars. But it did survive. Atlético Nacional eventually became a part of a different Colombian story. They won the Libertadores again in 2016. That same year, after the Chapecoense air disaster, Nacional asked CONMEBOL to award the Copa Sudamericana title to the Brazilian club they had been due to face. CONMEBOL did so and gave Nacional a fair play award. That doesn't erase 1989. Nothing erases 1989. But it shows the arc. From a football world terrorized by cartel power to a club capable of symbolizing solidarity. From fear to memory. From narco football to football that outlived the narcos. Before we go, 3 things to take away from May 17, 1989. First, Atlético Nacional's 6-0 win over Danubio was, on the field, an extraordinary performance. Usuriaga's 4 goals, Maturana's team, and a Colombian side storming into the Libertadores final. Second, the alleged threats against Espósito, Bava, and show how violently the game was being corrupted. This was not colorful dark arts. This was criminal intimidation. And third, the beautiful game survived because people inside it kept making beauty. Maturana's football, Higuita's audacity, Andres Escobar's grace, Colombia's rise, and Nacional's later renewal. On this day in 1989, Atlético Nacional beat Danubio 6-0 in Medellín, reached the Copa Libertadores final, and gave Colombian football one of its greatest nights in the middle of one of its darkest storms. That's all for episode 198 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. Tomorrow, go to May 18, 1931, when Argentina's professional league was finally formed and changed the global football map. See you tomorrow.